Hi there. I'm glad that you're joining me for a potentially 30-minute video on spiritual direction and the Christian soul care. Um, I just wanted to take this opportunity to do something different. The book was amazing. I have only a few pages left, but I figured I had enough to discuss it with the class. And my hope is just to point out some things that appeal to me, some of the key subjects that this book reviewed, and then take it from there. So what I'll do is I will address a location in the reading, what it is I highlight, and then what it is I would take away from it. I understand that one of the objectives of the assignment would be to integrate more of a personal tone for the overall concept of the book that we took away, but I'm going to weave that in as I go, so not to separate one portion of the video for the next. So just leaning right into it, this is a subject that appeals to me, pastoral counseling, spiritual wellness, the difference between psychotherapy, etc., therapeutic practices, etc. I know and understood that there are differences and similarities, but I wanted to know what the bigger differences were. And this book immediately outlines that from chapter one and so forth. So, starting with page 22, I just wanted to start with what this book would state as the bigger differences between spiritual directors or people ushering others in a biblical manner, in contrast to those who were more clinical. So, page 22, um, we read that psychotherapists seek to understand the inner world and relieve impediments to further grow in those they seek to help. So, I could stop there, but I want to integrate the idea that one, counseling, psychotherapy, mental treatment, this subject, in my opinion, is very taboo still. Um, I just want to say that I've been to counseling twice in my lifetime. I probably could have gained more guidance spiritually, but also clinically at any point in my time growing up. But I would say for sure twice I've gone to counseling. But psychotherapists address a ailment, an issue, a mentality, a genetical predisposition, if you will, even there versus what would be commentated on spiritual directors. So, moving on from that, on page 22, it states that spiritual directors, in contrast, are not invested in solving problems. We understand their primary job to be to help the directly attend and respond to God, seeking God in all things, even in the midst of their present experience. The person then finds what John A. Vetriel calls healing of meaning. I love that. Healing of meaning. I come across this quite often. My brothers and sisters in faith want, uh, by their stripes we are healed statements to have a purpose, a meaning, and above all, they want to accept that as the will of God into their lives. So I wanted to say that on page 22, as it relates to spiritual directors and the contrast of psychotherapists, that statement really hit home for me. Moving forward, again, summing that up for spiritual directors, it states that thus the focus of spiritual direction should never be simply oneself and one's conflict. The focus should always be on one's experience of God and one's relationship with God, others in the world, as well as oneself. So, obviously, as we are identifying soul care, not just within this course, obviously, but just moving forward with this text, we want to understand that the spiritual wellness and the leadership around spiritual wellness um, always is focused on God. They should have um, obviously a God orientated methodology. We will get to that as well. So, moving on from page 22, um, so we can go to, well, I should say the next page. um, so, page 24, um, So, spiritual directors, pastoral counselors, psychotherapists, that is briefly discussed in page 24. As we go down, just running into that really quickly, training programs in all three forms of those of soul care need to help those who offer soul care with their personal journey to psycho-spiritual wholeness in ways to facilitate the journey of others. This next statement is important. Helping spiritual directors, pastoral counselors, psychotherapists become literate in both psychology and spiritual domains of inner life will add years, not just courses, to current training models. So, one thing I really appreciate about this text is identifying the differences between those three, but then also what needs to be addressed to promote a more stable integration into obviously our society and our community. Um, it obviously points out that these dimensions are not communicating well. Although there are similar focuses, obviously, this person that you would have into your life as a counselor, a psychotherapist, a spiritual leader, these people should have a level of empathy. They should have a level of spiritual decorum, and so forth. And then also training. So we will get to that in the later portions, but um, it's terrible to think that people are not trained in the current positions that they have. I've come across that several times. It's a humbling experience because even if you find yourself asking for help, you may come across somebody who is just starting their job, they're just starting their journey, they have been mentored, but they're no longer being guided. I mean, any of those few things, really. And then that moment, you have to say, well, this person's trying. This person showed up to work. This person is willing to help you, and it puts you in a very humble position. Be that as it may, that does not help other people. Um, so I always want to stop here and say that for me, if you cannot do your job on any given day, or if you can do your job but not in a manner that helps that person, don't do it. Have a disclaimer statement. Be honest. Withdraw from the situation, or call somebody else into the picture that can, in private and in confidence, help you out with this particular issue. Um, and for me, that is on par with training. So, and that for me, it isn't just soul care, it isn't just pastoral counseling or psychotherapy. I would like to relate that to every facet of our society. If you cannot cook me a meal at a five-star restaurant, then please be honest. Don't attempt me to cook a meal, and me a meal, and then expect me to pay for it, and then I'm eating a $10 meal versus a $50 meal. Don't expect me to go to an educational institution and have teachers or professors of the like who are not challenging me to read what you're putting forth and have a discussion and really engaged in reading, but also educational experiences. Um, Three, one of the things I do, I'm a junkyard dog. I see this happen to me every year. Something happens to my car. I take it to one mechanic. Even if I've been to them before, they might not know this particular issue with my vehicle. Of course, I'm going to say, well, if you don't know what's wrong with it, I'm going to take it to someplace else. So there's this idea that, or even in the medical field, which I feel like I should probably discuss that too, but I think we're getting the picture here, is that I think one, we associate proximity with the best thing we have. And that's not the case. So, one, if you feel like training programs or whatever's happening in your church or whatever you experience in your life is just not enough, is not up to par to challenging you in growth, continue to travel. Continue other methods to reach out to people from a distance. I myself am actually submitting this video for a course that is out in Indiana. I live in Maine. So I would like the idea that we should settle for proximity of our lives. We are told to go forth and spread the word. As a matter of fact, Jesus Christ himself was nomadic. So please, if it was any help or consultation to somebody, I would like to say that we can all get uncomfortable together in different situations, both near and afar, and that includes training programs. So moving on, I apologize if that was a little bit of a tangent. Just skipping forth, we can look at the section called Spiritual Direction in the Orthodox Tradition. I did highlight a few things here. Of course, this is a more church-based in its review. We can go to page 29 for that matter. Moving forward here. Spiritual direction, however, goes beyond the confines of the sacrament and may be given in laity. The keys in the director be among those who have been illuminated by the Spirit of God. The one who has come to know God, who has wrestled with the passions and put on virtue, is the one from whom direction may be profitably received. So there is a caution to that. Obviously, you don't just want to form your own group, pick straws, and then have someone give you sacrament. Probably not a good idea. And the reason why I highlighted that is because it does base itself, the statement, in the form of tradition, but also wisdom. So there's a reason why certain sacraments have been performed in the manner of which they have. So if you're not familiar with that and how it helps other people, then reading that portion, starting at chapter 29, would help. Moving forward, I'd like to discuss spiritual direction in the Wesleyan holiness tradition. That is, I believe, I can start that process on page 120, so skipping way ahead. Thank you for your patience on that. So, the process of authentic transformation. So, we've read a lot about authenticity in this course, and that excites me because that's also coming to get to know yourself. Growing into your authentic spiritual self is not only uncomfortable and challenging, but it can be lonely. And the reason why I say that is because your spiritual self and your physical self may not be aligned. Um, I, for one, at my work and even in just common places in my life, I tell people I'm studying ministry, and I always seem to get the same look. And then it makes me laugh. It's like, yeah, I totally get it. Tattoos and a loud voice, you wouldn't really think of it. Be that as it may, having the spiritual authenticity is such a foundation for helping others. If you're looking for pastoral ministry, psychotherapy, counseling, you yourself have to be rooted knowing who you are. So obviously, you're not going to help anybody else discover who they are, one, and then how to address their issues in their life, two, if you are not grounded in your present moment and secure within yourself. So this statement moves forward to touch base with that a little bit. Authentic spirituality on page 120. Authentic spirituality is a journey of grace. By grace, you have been saved through faith. That's Ephesians 2:8. Though strenuous effort and vigorous discipline should be practiced in cooperation with grace, every stage of salvation is a gift of God's grace. I love that. Amen. The saga of grace starts with atoning grace, with the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. The story moves to preventing and preparatory grace, operating before we even know it, and giving us the capacity to choose God and good in spite of sin. And it goes to comment on saving grace as well. Moving forward, with Christ now living in the heart, the Christian discovers how serious God is about sanctifying grace. God will go on transforming the believer all through life by way of refining or perfecting grace. Even in heaven, the grace of God will likely be at work transforming us from one degree of glory to another. That is awesome. So God's working is never ceasing. It's continuous. I would like to put that in an analogy like your diet. So if you ever talk to someone who knows what they're talking about with diets, it's a lot to do with your metabolism. A lot of people don't know this, but you have an active metabolism and then you have a resting metabolism. God does not have a resting metabolism. He is constant, consistent, um, continuous in my life and yours, and that is something to just praise him for. Um, so in that regard, we can read continuously as that sanctifying grace moving forward. Um, John Wesley, a key component there, taught that although God makes the heart holy in an instant, there is no holiness that excludes continual increase. The scripture speaks of the act of sanctification in Acts 15:8 through 9, and the journey of sanctification in 2 Corinthians 3:18. Um, so millions in the Wesleyan holiness traditions claim that they didn't make up a second instantaneous work of grace that cleanses from sin. They have simply observed that this is the way God generally works. So, again, we're looking at something that is authentic. Excuse me. And I want to take the opportunity to say there can be a time where your authentic self is not appropriate and what you have to offer may not be the right time. So you can be authentic and wise in your methodology and execution and still not lose your refinement in your sanctification. Holding your tongue, allowing love to work through others, and just exercising patience, I think, in that regard is very important. So moving on from that, I like this next chapter as well, spiritual direction in the social justice tradition. I believe I only highlighted one, but that's on page 136. Um, so again, looking at spirituality, spirituality embraces passions and inspiration that come from within and connects us to the world. It includes the fundamental forces of life that which motivate love, concern, and passion. It does not constitute a separate category. So, understanding what spirituality is, I think again that is not understood. Um, I think at one point I understood spirituality as something or an image, let's just say a perspective in which people would have hmm the ability to meditate and smell like homemade soap. There, that would probably sum up my idea of spirituality. I know how lame that sounds and how vague, but for some reason, Sasha would view the definition of spirituality as homemade soap and someone who can meditate. That is not the case. I'm grateful that I'm coming across a better definition of it in my lifetime. Um, but I wanted to say that spirituality, and I know that it seems like a flexible term, but um, it's very fluid. Yes, and the experience itself is very fluid. Yes, but the outcome, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as this text is in my understanding, is directed at God Himself. Um, excuse me, and I don't want to discourage anybody by saying you can't have a spiritual experience that doesn't lead you to other revelations about yourself instead of revelations about God particularly, but the source of that spirituality should come from a holy place. So um, that is definition of spiritual direction, and that brief commentary is found on page 136. Moving forward from there, and then a bigger chapter, I believe in my mind, obviously, is ethical issues, spiritual direction, and psychotherapy. So, ethical issues. You wouldn't think there would be, but there are, because you just, again, you don't want to have someone pick straws and lead you in, um, I guess, the wrong direction. And if I could say it in some way, I don't know who said it, but I came across a discussion um, earlier with my fiance and I for the better lack of terms, I believe I said the worst things done to mankind have been started with the best intentions. So you can have the best intentions in the world. Um, Little small example: the alarm clock, phenomenal time. I know it's a little funny, but I don't necessarily like the alarm clock. Your body can naturally adjust. It's proven. You don't need an alarm clock for many things. It's useful, great intention, slightly traumatizing in the morning. So, chapter 10, spiritual direction and psychotherapy with ethical issues. Moving forward with that, just keeping in mind, again, you want to look at intention, training, and things that separate and define a Christian spiritual directiveness. So, we can look at page 184, for instance. I did highlight a lot in this section, and I'll try not to reread it as much as I already have. Um, one thing would be David Benner, as he is quoted, has defined spiritual direction as a prayer process in which a person seeking help in cultivating a deeper personal relationship with God meets another for prayer and conversation that is focused on increasing awareness of God in the midst of life experiences and facilitating surrender to God's will. Okay, so what would be the point of having that spiritual director, having that pastoral counseling, if the person you're aiding is not prepared to, one, accept God and God's will? That would be a little pointless. So I think a part of what this chapter is saying is be aware of your clientele, be aware of the people you're speaking to, and be aware of yourself. Um, you know, the awareness aspect spiritually, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say, I've had so many great, wise men and women talk to me about the Bible, talk to me about their faith, and I had absolutely no idea what the hell they were talking about. I'm just going to say it just like that. I had no idea what they were talking about. I would nod my head, go along, maybe write down one or two verses and meditate on it, but I wouldn't understand in depth and breadth about what they were providing me. So sometimes I heard this in a sermon from Pastor T.D. Jakes. He goes, if I were to give my 5-year-old keys to my car, it would not be a gift because my 5-year-old cannot control a car, knows nothing about a car. So just being aware of the person that you're aiding, and being aware of the person who is aiding you. And it doesn't mean that if you're not cohesive, if you're not in constant contact or in practice with one another, that both of you are lesser than. That's not the case. Compatibility, being equally yoked in a lot of manners of the way of biblical speaking, is very important when it comes to refinement. So I think there's some wisdom to be stated in that perspective as well. And I think, again, this book is just so great on highlighting the obvious points, but also giving reasons as to why those points are very important in the practice that we're looking at. Moving forward on page 184, getting in depth here for features of psychotherapy. On page 184, it states, helping in supportive relationship in a professional or agency context, one-on-one or in group, clinical or office-based, aims to strengthen a client's autonomy in formally hour sessions over weeks, months, or years. So psychotherapy and counseling is more, I guess there would be more of a scheduling, more contemporary, classical, and rudimentary. Now, I have a problem with that because like my two experiences with counseling was just that. You go to an office, you identify a few things, but it's not personal. There's someone with empathy, there's someone with understanding, and there's definitely someone with intellect, but there is no connectiveness to that. Not saying it's not useful. Psychotherapy is very useful. Counseling is very useful, but it does have its limitations, and it is different than what is described as a pastoral counseling or spiritual direction. So as we move on to the next page, page 185, features of spiritual direction is helping in supportive relationships in faith context. Again, one-on-one or in group, client may not have a crisis. Based in a community of faith, helps clients lead a life of faith, very key important. Focus on spiritual issues such as prayer life, religious experiences, relationship with God, aims to self-surrender to the will of God, and sometimes informal, periodic, and intensive. So, one of the things I got from that explanation, as it's different from psychotherapy and counseling, obviously is the spiritual focus, but client may not have a crisis. Sometimes, and we overlook this, um, stagnation is misunderstood. And we look at it, at least sometimes in my Christian life, I panic. And I've had this discussion recently, like if you're not doing enough, there's a problem. So there might not be a crisis, there might not be a death, there might not be a birth, there might not be a job loss, there might not just be a milestone or some upheaval or anything like that, but you have, for some reason, a Christian that is not at peace. And that's what I really took away from that on page 185, as it discussed very briefly the features of spiritual direction, is that the client may not have a crisis. And obviously, that contrasts psychotherapy and counseling because typically there is a crisis. So, what I loved about that, even though it sounds a little bizarre to say, is I find that a lot of my Christian family and my faith, it's an inward process. So you might not even, because it's so spiritually based, um, and you might not even see that issue come about until there's uh, almost a moment, like a cork pop off and everything just flows out, or a volcano eruption, and it just comes like this. Um, so it might not be a crisis then within the person, but it can definitely cause harm in spiritual wellness to my brothers or sister in faith. So that's why spiritual direction is at least important to me. And then, of course, the second portion of that explanation would be surrender. I will try not to cry. I will just add this little tidbit there. Surrendering is so important. I had a friend or gentleman I knew at the time who was teaching me how to um, drive a 18-wheeler, a truck. And oddly enough, his company um, was very faith-based, and to the point where his company was called Bloodline Trucking. And I said, why that? And he goes, our faith is a bloodline. Jesus Christ is a bloodline. And I took that and I was so enthralled by his explanation by who he was and what he did in the business. Um, I just wanted to know more about him. So he trained me for about a month and a half, um, trying to drive a big rig. And he gave a sermon in a very small church in southern Maine one day. And as an ex-Marine with confessed PTSD, he did have a lot of PTSD. He had several head traumas. He said the hardest thing to learn as a Marine when I came back home and found God was to surrender. Because Marines do not surrender. That stinks. That was so painful to hear, and I started crying. I was like, that's terrible. But it's beautiful because he understood that the physical power of the mind and the body did not compare to when you surrendered to God and you had that power bestowed upon you. So you became a different kind of soldier. And he understood that in his sermon, and he even so much as turned his back on the congregation and looked at the cross, and he goes, when I look at victory, I know what to look at now. And that's amazing because this Marine, this friend that I had for the time, taught me that if you can learn something, you can unlearn it. And if you are in a box, if you're guarding yourself, if you have these spiritual tactics, physical tactics, if you've just gone from one church to the next, etc., and you have yet to surrender to God, then there are ways that you can do that. So running out of time here. Let's just really look at this. Yes, okay. So sorry about that. Looking at the last portion in chapter 10, um, we can move forward to the next page, page 186. Um, and that is methodology. So just really quickly before I run out of time, um, how to integrate clinical practices and spiritual disciplines together. Um, that shouldn't be rocket science. There are some things that just work. And one of those things for me and what I took away was having someone there on a accessible basis, but engaging in a level that's authentic. So if you call me in the middle of the night and if you call me in the middle of the night and I have told you that I am not a night person, one, I have to be completely authentic with you and say that I'm not going to provide you with the best services. And then the second thing would to be identifying how in that moment, in that time, I can allow you to grow or to come at peace with a crisis that's coming on. Again, one of the two bigger mentions in the previous text, I think it was like 124, was psychotherapists and counselors typically and most common enough address a crisis where Christian counseling, spiritual counseling may not address a crisis. If you want to integrate those, look at the methodology. Be there as a leader. Be aware of who you're talking to. So be accessible, be aware of your clientele, and then have a straight surrender practice. Allow this person to focus on the power of prayer, knowing that their salvation is in their control, knowing that their faith in Jesus Christ is going to be a walk and continuous process, even if you're not there. Um, but if they do happen to call upon you, be honest about what it is you can offer. So, hopefully, I covered everything that kind of just speaks to me about this text. Again, I loved it. Like most of the text that we have, I just enjoy all of it. And there really wasn't anything else to look at from, at least in the time that I have. But spiritual direction in the care of souls. This is edited by Gary Moon and David Benner. I think they did an amazing job. It looks at methodology, history, a little bit of church history there too. But just it was allowed me to be so vulnerable and honest about where it is I wanted to be as a leader, but where it is I wanted to go after my ministry practice. And just honestly what it is I wanted to offer other people as a spiritual person. So absent all that, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to um, just listen and to walk through the text with me. Hopefully, I wasn't speaking too fast when I threw out the page numbers. But I believe if you looked at those few page numbers, in the very least, you will, get the kind of bread and butter of what this book could be used for. So thank you. I appreciate you. May God guide you in all that you are and all you continue to be, and stay blessed. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me. I just want to let everyone know that I am available and I am still learning, but we can learn together. So my email is mslucille92@gmail.com. That's my personal one. And if I happen to hear from you, then hopefully it's on a basis that we can grow together in faith and in Christ. Stay blessed.